Hello and welcome to the Pluso Presents podcast for the week of July 29th, 2024. My name is Mike Peluso. I am your host, and this is episode number 250. Yes, we made it, folks. And the title of this week's episode, as well as the title of our post of the week, is Cliques and Cohesive Teams. And this week's episode is all about a couple of experiences I've had where I was sort of in the in-group at work and not in the in-group at work. And it talks about the pros and the cons of cliques at work, of the in-group, of the team or the group of friends that kind of sets the tone and the agenda and the values of whatever small group you're working with at the office or on the job, wherever you are on the job. And it's kind of interesting because those dynamics can make for a great environment or they can make for a horrible environment. And honestly, I've experienced both. I talk about how I was the literal minority, not just because of skin color or background or socioeconomic history, but also in the way I thought. And then I've talked about times when I was just right in there with the leadership. I was making things happen with them. I was part of this really cohesive team. And there is a kind of a big difference when you're on the inside and when you're on the outside. And that's kind of what this episode's about. So I'll let the article speak for itself when we get there. But before we get there, I do want to take a moment for anybody and everybody who listens to this show to just say thank you. I never thought I'd get this far. I still don't know what I'm going to be doing next year when I stop working on the blog in earnest when we hit 10 years. But still, this is kind of a monumental achievement. You all have been part of it, those of you who've been listening, and just thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and I hope that I have added some value to your life. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And now, without further ado, as we always do every week, it's time for our post of the week.
Post of the week.
Cliques and cohesive teams. The origin of the word clique is interesting. Since the early 1700s, the word means an exclusive party of persons, a small set, especially one associating to aggregate power or privilege. Prior to that, it was used as the equivalent to the French word clique, which is defined as a set of men distributed through an audience and hired to applaud the performance of the actors. In both cases, the modern and the historical, it's all about a tight group of support around a superior. Of course, we see cliques in our professional lives. In my experience, they are more prevalent than not. There are signs when you are in a clique at work. A team has shared values. There is limited conflict on how things should be handled both inside and outside of your circle of influence and control. Communication is high at work, and most importantly, outside of work. I've been a part from and part of a clique. I've also transitioned from being on the inside to being on the outside, and all these experiences led to some very interesting conclusions on the benefits of and challenges with cliques. The most interesting time that I was out of a clique was when I was working at a government agency. I always joked that I was the token white guy, but like all good jokes, there was truth to it. For the majority of my time at the agency, I was the only male and the only Caucasian. The females of color definitely had a clique going on, led by our manager. They would have extensive conversations about topics I had zero experience with. Among them, Black family structures, the nuances of their church interactions inclusive of the personality of the pastors, the interactions of Black sororities, clothing, ethnic hair care, etc. Even the way they communicated would change, especially if they thought I wasn't around. It became more of a light Ebonics dialect. As an example, "I can't with you" was often heard when one member was telling a funny story to another. I would also hear about interactions and communications after hours, including social media, that I wasn't a part of. Now, it wasn't just race and sex that created the clique. It was also about jobs and the related mindset needed to be successful. Broadly speaking, they were all focused on the auditing functions of our organization. They were not risk takers and were very focused on rule following. Consequently, they all shared work values. My job was exactly the opposite. I was in a sales aligned role. To be successful, I had to take risks and work around the rules. Every time I thought about my job, the Earthworks album title, Apart and Yet Apart, came to mind. The outcomes of the clique was that it was a tremendously effective team. They were very in sync with getting the job done. They worked very effectively because of all the shared work values. There was never a question among them as to what's an acceptable idea or what is an appropriate time frame for work to get done. They all looked at their job as meeting the spec. Now, technically, the auditing functions were only part of what we were supposed to be doing, even though it was all consuming to the clique, and consequently, how our organization was run. Eventually, the monoculture did kill the organization, but it took years and years. During that time, it was a great group who did excellent, as they defined it, work. I won't lie that there was an emotional impact on my life. Plainly spoken, it sucked going to a job every day where I knew I was the outsider in every sense of the word, where my ideas and my values were obviously, and sometimes overtly, never seriously considered or valued. The next most interesting experience about cliques was when I went from being on the inside of one to being on the outside of one. I was hired into an IT group at a manufacturing firm. It was an effective team built around a boss who had shared values. I experienced the exact opposite of the government agency. This time, I was part of the culture of excellence. It was an IT culture, meaning we moved fast, broke things, and tried again. The goal was to learn as much as you can and then some more. We always tried to exceed the spec. Naturally, I thrived. I made friends, and I had shared engagements inside and outside of work. Then, sadly, the old boss got an opportunity at another firm several hours away. The new boss was more from the structured side of the firm. Almost instantly, he created a clique that was built around the few folks who did nothing beyond what they were required to do. There were lots of echoes of the government program. It was another meet the spec and nothing more mentality. The new boss was emotionally limited and old school vindictive. I even got slapped on the hand, or as he put it, course corrected, when I discussed the shoddy work of a colleague with another who was also impacted by it. The boss pretended to care about what I had to say and then argued with me about all the ways I was wrong. To top it off, they sent an email to the entire staff congratulating the colleague with the low-quality work for doing such a great job. The email was very clearly directed towards me. Suffice to say, my job satisfaction went into the toilet. Cliques, as I've illustrated with my personal examples, are usually monoculture and driven by a single individual, a linchpin. Sometimes that linchpin is the CEO of a large company, and so the CXO suite clique becomes the culture of an organization. Like my personal example, this can go poorly. Companies with bad cultures tend to crash hard. Think the overly aggressive Wells Fargo or Enron. This is one of the reasons why diversity was championed at large companies. Different ideas should influence the culture. I think this works really well with large, sprawling organizations with many decision makers up and down the chain. This is where part of a healthy senior leadership mentality is to balance cultural influences. If you have aggressive decision makers with equal power and authority with risk-averse decision makers, you get a culture that's something in the middle. Unfortunately, this tactic doesn't work in smaller organizations, teams, and their resultant cliques. In my government job, and when I had a new boss, I couldn't influence the culture because I wasn't in the clique. I didn't have equal say to go to my boss and say, "No, this project is crap, I won't accept it. Go do it again." When I said that, I got the course-correcting, going to cut this off at the head speech. So like much of my writing, it leads to the question of what should you do when you find yourself in a job with a clique? Well, if you are in the situation like either of my jobs where the clique at work was highly effective, then just enjoy the ride. It's especially good when you are part of an effective team. Nothing lasts forever, so appreciate it when you have it good. Even when I wasn't in the clique, but it was an effective group, it made the job easier. I learned the group norms even though I wasn't part of them and was able to work with them. I could respect what they were doing even if it was completely against what I was trying to do. But what if you are on the outside and the group is performing poorly, like when my new boss came in at the manufacturing firm? Do you wait it out? Hide in your job and hope things change? I've tried that, and I can say it's a sad experience. It turns a career into a 9-to-5 job. You're rarely happy at work. Even working for a great company can become a miserable job, and that's a horrible feeling. Of course you could leave, but as I've discussed on my blog, you stand to lose so much if your organization has some form of equity and benefits, i.e., longer vacations or higher pay with tenure. That being said, even if you don't decide to leave, it's time to start looking around. That's what I did at the government agency. The job was good enough to keep, but I was constantly looking for something better. Good opportunities do come along if you're patient enough. One option that I don't recommend is to try and change the culture. It won't work and becomes an exercise in futility. Culture comes from people's personalities and most deep beliefs. These don't change quickly. They only change over decades and with lots of life experiences. The one caveat is if you become the boss, then you get to decide the culture and possibly lead the clique if one naturally forms. Of course, that changes your job and you may not like it as much. Cliques in the workplace aren't inherently bad. They can feel that way if you're not part of it. They can also be one of the things that makes you feel like you've got the best job in the world if you're in an organizationally effective clique that matches your personality. Often, I end my articles about conceptual facets of the workplace by arguing that you have to be aware of whatever the work thing is and plan accordingly. That fits here. I also wanted to underscore that these things don't really change all that much. They are tied to the boss, and unless your boss changes regularly, something that can be related to all sorts of other issues, you'll have to work in and around the clique. My biggest piece of advice is don't get mad at it. Don't let it drain you emotionally. Cliques are one of those things that simply exist. If you're on the outside of one, remember that someday the tables may quickly turn and the quality of your work life will increase exponentially. If you're on the inside, like I said earlier, enjoy it while everything simply clicks. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Peluso Presents podcast. You can follow the Peluso Presents efforts via Twitter @PelusoPresents, on Facebook, on Medium.com, just search for Mike Peluso, on LinkedIn, and of course on the blog located at www.pelusopresents.com. You can email us directly via peluso@outlook.com. This podcast is available on all major podcast services, including iTunes, Google Play Music, or your podcast service of choice. We love and appreciate any comments and reviews you wish to leave. Please remember to support this effort by sharing and liking the postings on all your social media. If you'd like to support this effort more directly, you can via patreon.com/Peluso Presents. Thank you for listening, following, sharing, and for your support. We appreciate it.